The Dan Flow is all about human stories, and these human stories help inform knowledge about humans, and ultimately for the cause of better understanding human consciousness. Bridget Finklaire, I would like to welcome you to the Dan Flow. It truly is an honor to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's absolutely delightful to be here.
So I had a look. I'll admit I didn't get to read your book, but I got to read a whole bunch of reviews about it and reviews that people have. So that's for Red Dress. And then also you have something called Bone Circle, which is it's kind of a workshop, right? And again, lots of very, very good reviews. So it sounds like you've been doing some great work out there and having a massive impact on people's lives. And I think the world can thank you for that.
Thank you so much for recognizing that. I do indeed hope that I've had some positive impact. I think we all do, really.
Yeah, I think, something that a lot of contemporary conversation runs into, and I know you have a background in, and you were saying it's not psychology, it's hypnotherapy and
Psychotherapy.
Psychotherapy. There's a lot being made currently. Obviously, the massive impact of social media and these social media platforms and now LLMs and so on. What is that going to have? The impact that that's going to have on human well-being, on health and happiness and so on. And there's also a culture of medication. So lots of kids and adults are on all kinds of medications. What are the real impacts of that? And a schooling system that is too rigid and kills the creative spirit of children, and then they go to corporate companies where the same thing continues. And so you have a whole society that's actually seemingly working against the natural human being and their ability to thrive creatively and spiritually. But I suspect this problem's been around for a little bit longer than just that.
That's a very interesting set of questions, really, in three parts. And I think you're probably right. It's been around for a long time, but it's gathered pace and gathered momentum exponentially in the last few years, I believe, because of the AI question that's coming in. So more and more, and also with technology and the smartphone. So even 20 years ago, we didn't all have a smartphone. 30 years ago, when my children were born, nobody really had a mobile phone except maybe a few executives at the top of a big corporate.
Car telephones and things.
Then they were about the size of a brick. So that was the last probably generation that was still playing outside and going to the park and, going fishing and climbing trees and all of those sorts of things, which are so important for development. That was the generation that still hadn't been completely captured by the social media nor the medication that seems to have ballooned in the last couple of decades. So we can look at it and it can look quite grim, can't it? Because we have children who are addicted to their screens, who are losing social skills, who are losing just the ability to be free or to be creative or to work things out for themselves, to experience life, their experiences through a screen. Then we've got the pressure for the parents as well to not really be able to give that quality time to children. They're maybe working and under financial pressure. So the children are going to be becoming more medicated, particularly with all the vaccine agenda that's in the world at the moment. And then if we look at the schooling system, I don't know about the schooling system here or in America, but certainly know a little bit more about it in the UK. And it's become much more about goals and paperwork and admin and scores and whether you can tick this, that and the other box rather than looking at the child as an individual. And actually, I think the teachers have a really tough time because they're dealing with a lot of statistics and bureaucracy, which they didn't go into teaching to do. And they're also dealing with a lot of children who are maybe dysfunctional in their attention, who are on medication, who are used to quick, short, sharp screen time and find it difficult to focus, find it difficult to maintain any kind of focus for any length of time. So it's really a difficult situation for everybody. I think partly a series of different things coming together that has created that scenario that you speak of. So I think it's having a huge impact. We have to kind of come into balance again. Everything is about balance, isn't it? The pendulum swung one way, kind of needs to swing the other way. And I think that's happening in grassroots. People are beginning to get fed up with AI content. People want something that's real, that they can relate to. And it's interesting because you talked about consciousness and people and life and living. And that's what that's about. It's real life, real stories, how that impacts people. Because what we have in common is we're all human beings. We're all going through this experience.
Indeed. I think, sort of touching on all of these things, this perfect storm and what chaos that creates for human well-being and happiness. But I think what I was also alluding to is that a lot of these challenges have been around for much longer. And I should have specifically said thousands of years. Now, this is not just industrial revolution. It's not just because the parents don't have that. Obviously, those things are valid. Obviously, those things are exacerbating a lot of those conditions. But that human beings have been looking to get rid of this weird discomfort, this thing that just doesn't. Why doesn't it quite feel right? What am I missing?
I'm sure you're absolutely right. If we go back to caveman, I'm sure they had all sorts of angst about where's the next piece of food coming from, and am I going to be warm enough? Do we get firewood? Can we even make the fire this evening? So human beings have always had that dichotomy in a way, because there's beauty in the world as well, isn't there? There's beauty, there's experience, there's love, there's joy, there's children, there's rainbows and waterfalls, but there's also the angst of living. And I think that's part of the duality that we live in. You know, we live in a world which is black and white, good and bad, hot and cold. There's all these different polarities. And I believe, as a very spiritual person, that we actually come here to learn. It's like a schoolhouse or a simulator, maybe. You know, when a pilot goes in a simulator, they're learning how to fly before they take the plane out and crash it. And it's a little bit like that. We're here to learn, and the soul is here to learn and to grow through these experiences. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, we grow the most through challenge. So it's almost as if we're in this system of things to face challenge, to understand that, to overcome it, and to grow from there.
I know your book, Red Dress, someone sort of compared it to, someone else did, compared it to Eat, Pray, Love. I think you've also alluded to, no, that's something different. Let me not stray there. But essentially this idea of someone who has a career, has pursued a more traditional way of life, succeeds at that, realizes there's still an itch that needs to be scratched, and then goes on a journey to explore what that might be, and ultimately discovers a deeper truth and a path that is a different kind of journey, or an adjustment to the journey. How much of that is autobiographical for you?
Fabulous question. It is based loosely on the events of my life and a lot of my life experience, but it is also most definitely a fiction. So the characters are completely fictitious. Some of the storyline is true to my own story. For example, the protagonist, Katie, is a psychotherapist working in London's Harley Street, which was definitely me. She's on a spiritual path, which was also me, but her spiritual path, she's very naive, and she's going with trepidation and sort of sitting on the fence with it, not really sure of what she's doing. So, and that isn't me really. Her journey is probably a culmination of 30 years of my journey. There's another character in the book called Shanti, and that's probably a little bit of me in Shanti. And Shanti runs a crystal shop, and she's into everything alternative, and she's actually very knowledgeable. And there's also part of me, because Katie is a therapist, she has a supervisor, And there's a part of me in the supervisor as well. So there's aspects of myself in a few of the characters. And then there's other characters that are just totally fictitious. Katie lives in West London. I also lived in West London, but not in the same part of London that she did. It was a really good way of bringing to light some spiritual practices, the idea of awakening to a spiritual journey, the idea that the normal markers of success maybe aren't successful, they're Pyrrhic victories, they feel quite empty. But I didn't want it to be a heavy book. I wanted it to be something light-hearted. I wanted it to be funny, to be a page turner, and to explore a lot of different things. So not only is it exploring what is success, but it's also exploring relationship dynamics. There's a whole dynamic between her and somebody that comes into her life and her husband. And also to look at addiction, the notion of addiction, the notion of the fact that we are all wounded in relation to wholeness. We are whole and complete at one level, but we are kind of wounded in relation to love and in relation to wholeness. And that can create dysfunctional patterns. And it's looking at that on a subtle level. So there's different levels of Red Dress. And then, of course, there's some people who just read it as a funny book about this woman who's slightly crazy, deciding she's going to have this spiritual journey. So you can take it at whatever level you like, but it's partially autobiographical. People who know me would often say, oh, was that you, or was that something you made up? And it would be very difficult to discern. It's not like one part of the book is definitely my journey and another part is definitely fiction. It's woven in together.
So you were saying earlier, part of this life exploration is that it's supposed to be difficult. Because, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but that there are these challenges, and these challenges are necessary for you to grow. Because if there's no challenge, then why would you move, right? And you were just mentioning for Red Dress how you played with the idea of the characters being wounded, completely whole in another way, but wounded in some way in love or in whatever area of their life. Do you think that those kind of wounds, the kind of pain that people walk around with, and a lot of the suffering that's in the world, are actually really, they're all just opportunities for growth?
It's very difficult when you're going through immense pain to think this is an opportunity for growth and this is good for my best and highest interest. It's usually retrospectively that we look back and go, oh,
that wasn't so bad.
That wasn't so bad.
Now that it's not here anymore.
Yeah, no, it's not here anymore. But I do, and of course, everybody's life is not difficult. Some people have quite blessed lives, or appear to, but perhaps it's just that they appear to. We don't know what's going on internally with them. I do believe the soul possibly chooses an easy life, having had a difficult life, to give it a break, perhaps.
A little holiday life.
Yeah. All of life is experience. All of our life is experience. So whether it's we're having a positive experience or a negative experience, it's an experience that we signed up for and chose and came in for. So I do think the soul possibly, well, I can't prove it, but I believe that the soul chooses certain situations, some of which are going to be challenging. And it chooses them before incarnation because it wants to grow in that particular area. It wants to understand things. Often, if you look back, the worst day of your life ends up being the best day of your life. And I always think about, actually, Joe Dispenza, who has this terrible accident on his bike and he completely crumples his spine and can't move. And all of his work that he's done since then has come from him being able to heal that spine. And I'm sure we all have different versions of that, where something has happened, it feels awful at the time, but how we rise out of that is really beautiful.
I think it would be unfair to say, or it would seem very unfair, because obviously perspective plays into this, but to say that whatever pain or anguish you have in your life is something that you chose and it's there for you to overcome. That is the challenge that you've set for yourself. That would seem very unfair, right? But
Absolutely.
Perhaps at some level it's true, but it's so difficult for us to, like you say, whilst you're in pain, whilst you're in anguish, it just doesn't seem right. It just feels unfair and
unsympathetic, unempathetic, perhaps as well, to say that to someone.
oh, absolutely. No, because it would kind of sound like, well, it's your fault. Anyway,
Yeah.
even though a lot of things, and I mean, let's turn it down from sort of the worst of possible circumstance that people could have in physical life, being born in absolute poverty, in violence, and whatever else. I think for a lot of people, now suffering is self-induced. A lot of psychological states that people are in, the kind of, there isn't, so we're not talking about serious privation or anything, just for someone who actually kind of has what they need, could actually be happy. There's enough food, there's enough security, there are actually enough people around that they could have meaningful relationships with, but for some reason they can't. There's depression and anxiety and all kinds of things holding them back. What would you, and obviously there isn't just one thing fixes all, but where would you recommend people start if they feel this, excuse me, if they feel this kind of dis-ease with life, even though there isn't something major wrong?
It's a really great question, and I do think it's multi-answers. I want to also backtrack a little bit to say sometimes things happen to us in life that probably the soul chose. But I think we also create things. We also create with our thoughts and our beliefs. We create our own reality. So there's a discernment between what are those things that seem to come left field on a Tuesday afternoon and knock you flat, and what are those things that are chronic, ongoing anxiety, depression that you were speaking of. And those things that come out of left field and knock you flat, those are the things that the soul has probably chosen. But there may be only 2 or 3 things in your life, or maybe the soul has chosen for you to have ill health and as a challenge, for example, or to come off a bike and break your back, or for your husband to die, or to go through divorce. Those sorts of things, I think probably the soul chose specifically for some learning. But the rest of it, I believe we create ourselves here. And so if you're caught in a loop of depression or anxiety, and actually you're not in a space of extreme poverty, you're not in a war zone, you have the opportunities there, but they're not happening. I like to think of one of the bones of the bone circle, which is the other book, is pain versus suffering. So there's always pain in life. Okay, there's always pain. You know, you can trap your finger in a door. You can,
as I've done before, and it's undeniably painful.
Exactly. So you can have pain, and that could be emotional pain, it could be psychological pain, it could be physical pain. There's always going to be pain in life. But what we can avoid is the suffering. So when you see people in therapy, they are suffering with something that happened that's probably repressed or suppressed. They don't remember. Maybe they do remember, but it's been ongoing for a long time, and they're spiraling down. That's suffering. And part of the work that I did as a trauma therapist, really a trauma specialist, was to unravel that suffering, to hear the story and to witness it.
To allow the pain.
To allow the pain.
To agree, yes, that is painful.
The pain, really, you need to go back and uncover it, because what do you do when you're in, if you say, you know, cut yourself, you wrap it in a bandage. Well, you wrap emotional pain in a bandage. You wrap it in a story, and you wrap it in layers. You know, my dad was horrible to me, or he left, or whatever is your story. There's a story. And the story you tell yourself and the things that you've made up about the original pain becomes the suffering. So to liken it into something really simple, if you get a splinter in your finger, it hurts. Big splinter from a rough piece of wood, it hurts. If you get the tweezers and you take that splinter out, it's really painful when it first comes out, but that finger will heal. If you leave the splinter in there and you wrap it up in a bandage and it gets really sore and then it gets infected and now it's, and you leave it there and it's gone deeper into the skin and you can't get it. And now there's a whole story and a whole thing of suffering and it's hurting. And it's the same with psychological and emotional things. There's usually a source of that. And sometimes if somebody's very depressed, it's not that there's one source. There are many incidences, probably in the first 7 years of life, which might have got exacerbated in the next 7 years of life. And maybe it's those memories that you're latching onto, but it's coming from an earlier source. And it's always about going back to the source and re-examining it and going, okay, what happened? I'm sorry this happened to you. And you're kind of metaphorically taking the splinter out. It's going to hurt, but it's going to heal. So if somebody's deep in depression, there's lots of different reasons that people have depression. I learned this as a therapist. One tool doesn't suit everybody. So different people are depressed for different reasons. And sometimes it's about shifting your mindset, shifting. Okay, what is causing this depression? Okay, what can I do that resolves this? What solutions are there? For example, with depression, there was a therapist I can't forget his name, in New York that used to take his depressed clients out for a walk in Central Park because going for a walk in the sunshine lifted their depression. Now, there's lots of different things. That's a very simplistic interaction.
So a walk and talk therapy session.
You used to do walk and talk therapy sessions, and that used to work. Now, it depends on the person and what the severity of the depression and what's going on. But the thoughts we have, the feelings create the feelings we have. Thoughts and feelings dance together like yin and yang. They're intricately connected and they draw more of them. So if you think of something and it gives you a feeling and you think of more of those things that give you that same feeling, so it just compounds. And so your thoughts and your feelings, which stem from the beliefs that you have, which mostly are erroneous, they're just conditioned into us in childhood, can create depression and anxiety. So it's always about awareness. It's always about understanding and awareness. And you can do that alone. You can do that with the help of a book, with the help of a mentor, a coach. You can do it by going off and learning to meditate, or going to India or Tibet or something like that, or going on the Eastern type of path, or you can do it by going to see a psychotherapist or a healer. There's many different ways. And I think it's finding the right route for you, for your personality and your particular suffering.
So what I'm taking from this is that your first step is basically just recognizing, just saying, okay, I am suffering and there must be a way to undo this, and then go figure out what the best way for you is. What I find quite interesting about your explanation of the bandage and how you wrap the wound up and all of these things, these stories that you create. And I'm somewhat obsessed about this idea of stories, of human stories, but also how we create these stories. And I think for some people listening, when you say like you create your own suffering, or you create things in your world, they tend to think, oh, is this some weird woo-woo thing? And it's like, no, you can actually go sit down and talk your way through it. Something happens. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. Your mind wants to find a way to lessen that pain, so it creates stories around this. Those stories that you've created are your creations. They're not real. They seem real to you, and they're real in that they are in your story in your head, but it's not reality. And so they're actually within your power to change. They're within your power to unwrap that bandage and to go heal that thing. But I also think sorry, am I going off here on the thing? But I've noticed for myself that if I'm in a very good mindset, and you're saying attitude, but let's say just mindset, mood, and I'm feeling really good, like something something wonderful happened. I'm sitting down with friends and someone shares a story of success and I'm happy with them and we're laughing and we're having a great time. And I pause for a second and ask myself, how is my life? Because of that mood, because of what the current situation, my mind tends to jump back to pieces of story of all the times that I've experienced that joy, that I've been with friends and the laughter. And you think, wow, isn't life just so beautiful? But that's a story, you just remember this little sliver. And if you just got some bad news, something horrible went wrong, like this thing or whatever, the tax man wants to look at your stuff again, or what, then you pause and you think about your life and you suddenly remember all of these things that have happened, it's like, oh, life is so miserable, why? And in either case is that the full story of your life, but in each, because of the mood, because of the attitudinal situational awareness, I don't know what exactly one's supposed to call that, but you recollect a different story or different parts of your story. And so what you're saying is for someone to spiral into deep depression means that if you can't find a way, anxiety or anything, if you can't find a way to step out of that and go remind yourself that there's something else or figure out how to unwrap some of those bandages, then it'll just get worse and worse because you're just reinforcing it. And you're actually, while you're busy doing this, you're suffering. And then you create the story in your head. Look, even more suffering. Isn't that typical of my life, just to have more suffering?
So what you were explaining about your own life, having a lovely time with friends, and then if you look back, you think of all the others, is exactly what I was saying about how thoughts and feelings compound. So you're experiencing a really good moment, and that reminds you of other good moments and other friends and other things that were joyful. So it's like a magnet, isn't it, for all these similar thoughts and feelings that will buoy you up. But when you're going through a bad space, you think you're doing the opposite. So those negative feelings or unhelpful feelings of, oh, the tax man's going through my accounts again, or whatever it is, or I've missed the bus, or whatever it is, I'm late for my appointment, can then trigger a lot of other, or magnetize, if you like, similar thoughts and feelings. So this is the power of thoughts and feelings. I just want to circle back a little bit to the person who's sitting there depressed. Yes, acknowledging is the first thing, to be aware and say, yeah, okay, I'm depressed. And the second thing I find very powerful is choosing. We have choice. We always have a choice. You have a choice. You illustrated that well. The choice to focus on the joy of having a really great time with your friends, or to focus on something that's gone wrong. And so choosing to resolve it can be very powerful. If you say, well, I'm depressed, okay, I've acknowledged it. I'm feeling depressed right now. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. I don't know what's causing it. I just know I'm miserable. But I'm going to choose to find a way. I'm going to choose to break this. I'm going to choose to heal it and resolve it. That has a lot of power in it. And I think once you've chosen, it's about intending and committing. And if you choose, intend, commit to something that you know is going to be beneficial to you or that you would love, I'm sure the person with depression would love to not feel depressed, then you'll
Absolutely,
get there.
yeah.
You'll get there. The human mind is way more powerful than we realise. You're way more powerful than you realise, all of you, every single one who's listening to this. We don't think we're powerful, but the mind is very, very powerful, and we can do anything. And going back to what you're saying, isn't that woo-woo? If you think about just, suppose you want to go on holiday. You have an idea that you want to go on holiday. Then you start thinking about, what sort of holiday would I like? Do I want to go and camp by the river, or do I want to go on a plane to somewhere exotic? Do I want to go to a city? There's infinite varieties of holidays you can have. You start to make decisions about what you want. You might have to look at budget, what you want to do. That initial thought, I want to go on holiday, creates a holiday eventually, and all of the thoughts about what you would love for that holiday and blocking off time in your diary booking the flights or whatever you've got to do.
You are creating that reality.
You are creating that reality. And it's the same with the person with depression who's got everything going for them and they could have a relationship if they wanted to. It's the thought, I could do this and I'm going to choose to do that and I don't know how it's going to work. And by the way, you might make some mistakes and that's okay. People get really, I've got to do it all perfectly. I've got to have my perfect holiday. Well, you know, if you have make a mistake on this holiday, you'll know, you'll learn. We went to the beach. It was awful. I got sunburnt. You know, next time I'm going to go to the mountains.
Stung by a jellyfish.
Stung by a jellyfish. I'm not going there again. So we learn. We learn from experiences, or we can. So I think the vast majority of our lives we create them. But unfortunately, most people create them unconsciously by going round and round in cycles and patterns and loops of thinking that maybe were conditioned in us in our early years. And we don't think outside the box always and say, okay, what would I actually love? What am I actually choosing? They get, and as you said, get caught in a depressive cycle. Oh, I'm depressed. Oh, that's my bad luck. Oh, I always have bad luck. If you've defined yourself as someone who's always had bad luck, guess what's
That's a bandage. That's a bandage story that you're
going to create more bad luck.
You can end up with gangrene that way.
You can end up with gangrene.
And so you want to try and I think this is because there are things like The Secret floating about, and there's talk about quantum physics working at microcosmics, working sort of in your life and invoking these things and so on. I think a lot of that creates, as you're saying, sort of a woo-woo thing. And I'm not saying that there aren't spiritual, powerful spiritual forces at work in the world. Or there are lots of things I don't know. There are lots of things that I've experienced, but my experience is tainted by the fact that I'm a human being and I use my brain to try and understand and interpret what I experience. So, but I do like the fact that you're explaining in a very practical sense how you're planning a holiday. And that thought sets it in motion in the same way I am suffering crippling anxiety, debilitating depression, whatever. And I want to fix it. And it's just that recognition. It's saying, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know where to start. But this is a mission. And I'm going to keep applying myself to this. And then trusting that the mind is actually, as you said, so incredibly powerful. Because there are ways of changing your reality. You say changing your reality, again, not magical woo-woo. Changing your reality step by step by doing little things, by maybe changing some habits, acquiring some habits, maybe a little bit of a morning routine, a little bit of meditation or prayer or something that you do, or going for a walk, talking out loud to yourself, writing in a journal, something that establishes, oh, here, I'm setting things in motion so that my mind can apply itself to try and find the way forward.
Yeah, I'd like to speak into that a little bit. There's a couple of things I want to loop back on. There's so many avenues we could go down here. It's fantastic.
Indeed.
So just going back to the depression and the choice, and I don't know how I'm going to do it and all of that, or the deep anxiety. Obviously, some people are going to have more work and it's going to take longer. But one of the things that I used to do back in my days as a therapist would surprise people, particularly if they'd been for therapy before, because I'd ask them the usual questions, what have you come to see me for? Tell me a bit about your childhood. When did this start? All of those kinds of normal questions. And then towards the end of the session, I would say, okay, I just want you to put all of that to one side for a moment. So let's suppose that they're deeply depressed or extremely anxious. Put all of that to one side.
All of that story.
I wouldn't say story because for them it's real. Hey, and some stories are real. So I would just say, put that to one side for a moment. I want you to imagine. Now, as soon as you engage imagination, you're in a different brain set from story and logic. You've changed gears. I want you to imagine something. Can you do that? Everybody's going to go, yes. Very few people say they can't imagine something. If they do, you just say, close your eyes.
Have you found some of them?
Never. And
just imagine that you could imagine.
Yeah. No, you could say something like, do you have a chair at home? Yes. tell me what colour the chair is. Purple. Oh, well, you've just imagined that chair, you know, so visualised it. So say, I want you to imagine that you go to sleep tonight. And at that point, I would actually just check in that they were sleeping okay, because that's a big factor in depression. So just checking that, and they go, we're sleeping okay, or maybe they don't. And I go, okay, well, I want you to imagine that you've gone to bed, and in the part that you're sleeping, you're deep asleep, and you wake up in the morning, and there's been a complete miracle, and your whole life has changed, and everything that you would love is in your life. And you don't know how that's happened. It's been a miracle overnight. So you sit up, you don't know that it's happened. How would you know that miracle has happened? And how does your day go? Because that's really what the person wants. And then I say at the end, I describe it all, and I used to say at the end, is that your goal for therapy? Or do you have some other goal in mind? And they'd be brought up short because they'd never thought that there might be a goal for therapy. They just thought therapy was about talking about their problem. And sometimes they go, well, no, I don't need that. I just need this. I just need to find a partner. I just need to come out of depression. I just need to be able to calm my anxiety enough to do a speech for I'm the best man at my friend's wedding or whatever. But very often it would be the miracle day. So I now get them to visualize it and say, okay, just choose it. Choose this. Choose that you're going to create this, that you want this. This is your intention. We don't know how long it's going to take you to get there. But it gives you something. It gives you direction. You're not going round and round in your mind about how depressed you are and why you're depressed. You're suddenly going, yes, I'm depressed and all these things are happening. But wow, out there in the future is this miracle day. And most people's miracles are, it would be something like, I wake up and my partner's next to me in bed, you know, they're single maybe, or I've got the fantastic job, or I get out of bed and I'm living in this amazing, but they're ordinary things. They're not outlandish things. They're very ordinary things. So they're very acceptable to the mind. The mind can go, yeah, I can do that. And then immediately you've come out of that spiral, out of that story into a different direction. There was another point that I wanted to make, which was about how once you've made that intention and that choice, so let's take the example of depression. So you've got depression, you finally sort of acknowledge to yourself, I've got depression, I think I need some help with this. Somewhere, maybe from a book, from a television program, could be anything, a therapist, a healer. I've got depression, I need some help with this. I'm going to choose to go beyond this. Okay, let's have a look on Google. What can I do for depression? I think it's better if I go for a walk every day in the sunshine. I need to drink more water. I need to eat better food. There's a big connection between gut microbiome and depression, for example. So maybe you start on those things. What happens is little bits of magic happen. And I don't mean woo-woo. I don't mean you're going to manifest all this stuff. But little bits of magic do happen. Because what happens is you start to notice things. So you've decided to go for a walk to get some fresh air, and you know you need to eat better. And while you're walking, you bump into somebody who tells you about this new health. There's things like that. There's these serendipitous coincidences that start to happen in life once you've got a direction. And I like to liken that to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So everything we do in life is like a hero's journey. And the first part of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which he got from looking at comparative religion and all sorts of different wisdom traditions. Everybody's got a creation story, for example. So he mapped this hero's journey. And it maps to our psyche. We love the hero's journey. All top-grossing films like Star Wars and Harry Potter and The Matrix all follow the hero's journey perfectly. But we have our own hero's journey. And that hero's journey starts off with saying we're going to take the journey. It starts off with acknowledging that we're stuck, which he calls the child in hiding. It's Harry Potter under the staircase. And then the very next thing is the choice to go on that journey of getting better, for example. And then the very next thing that happens is called a threshold guardian. And it's there to say, are you really committed? Do you really want to take this journey? Do you have what it takes? And as long as you can overcome that, and it's normally to do with time or money or energy or I'm afraid, And if you can just acknowledge that and step over that threshold guardian, you are now on your own adventure. You're on a journey, even if that's just to go and buy a loaf of bread today, or get over my depression, or create a completely different life. So I love to look at things that way. There's lots of layers to this.
The guardian, the threshold guardian. And is that something, I mean, I understand that in the typical hero's journey, the story that you would, let's say, as a writer, as a novel, that would be sort of one big thing that someone has to overcome. Typically, right? In, let's say in sort of a more fictional setup, that they have to learn to have courage, or...
Normally the big thing is the demon or the dragon that's further in. The threshold guardian is a small one. So in The Matrix, for example, he's got to decide whether he's going to take the red pill.
And it's that active decision. It's
just
to say, I'm going to do it.
He knows that if he takes the red pill, something different's going to happen. If he takes the blue, he goes back to his normal life. That's a threshold guardian. At that point, there's going to be fear. There's going to be, what do I do? And it would be very easy to go, oh, let's just go back to my ordinary life.
Yeah.
So that's a threshold guardian.
Because at least that's the devil I know.
That's right, yeah. So there's the threshold guardians are normally fairly small. It's sort of, I want to go and see a therapist. Oh, but this therapist lives a bit too far away from me and the parking's really difficult there. It's going to be something like that.
It's going to take 4 weeks before I can get an appointment.
4 weeks before I can get an appointment. Maybe I should do something. Maybe I should do something different. I want to go on holiday to the Caribbean. Oh, but that's a long way away and it's too much money, so I'm not going to go. So they're normally small things that take you off track. Do you have the conviction or the courage of your convictions to go on the journey? And then the big things that you're there to learn, like courage, those are the things that you actually learn along the way. So actually Matrix is good because Morpheus is teaching Neo all sorts of stuff. And he's teaching him because he's in training for then the confrontation that he has to have with Smith. I hope that people have seen The Matrix, otherwise it's not going to make sense. But you could equally talk about Harry Potter.
Agent Smith.
Agent Smith, yeah. So you could equally talk about any of these kind of stories. You could talk about The Wizard of Oz. All of these are based on the hero's journey. But we have our own journey. We have our own journey, and things open up for us as we take that journey.
And I'm just thinking for myself, because in fiction, you have a beginning, middle, end. Typically, right? That's the simplicity of that. That's
the format, yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose you can argue in life you also have a beginning, middle, and end. But in terms of your personal journey, in terms of your seeking of truth, excuse me, a little bit cold in here than I thought it would be.
It's a bit cold. Shivering slightly, but we're
last time the air conditioner wasn't working, I'm sitting here sweating, and now it's sort of...
It's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's an experience.
It's an experience.
It's keeping me on my toes.
And so I think in real life, you don't always just have... Your story has sort of ebb and flows, right? It has these chapters, and a chapter can be a whole adventure by itself. And you manage to confront the dragon, and, and they lived happily ever after. And then 2 weeks later, a new journey starts, a new challenge comes around, and there's a new threshold guardian that needs to be confronted for you to get to that. That it isn't... There's sort of a multi-chapter, and it could maybe just be one. It might be simple enough for one person that builds their whole life, builds up to this place, and suddenly they realize, and it's such a big realization, and it changes their life so completely, and then that just sets all of it, and maybe they'll have like a small little chapter at the end for, this is what it's like to deal with old age, or whatever.
Yeah, sometimes people learn right near the end. I think that we have cycles within cycles and journeys within journeys. So you could have a small hero's journey. Me coming here today is a little bit of a hero's journey. I've not been here before. I had to find the parking space. I had to leave on time and deal with some slow traffic. It's a little bit of a hero's journey if you're doing something out of the ordinary every day. But that's not the story of my life, obviously. Then there will be different phases of your life. You've got the youthful you that was you've got the child, you've got the youth, then you've got the kind of the serious career. For women, you've got the motherhood and the crone, and then for men, you've got the wise man going into that. So we have different phases of life, and through those phases, we have different hero's journeys. So yeah, a hero's journey can be a small thing, like me getting to the studio today, or it could be a big thing. Like me coming to South Africa, that was a bit of a hero's journey. Or it could be, having children or getting married. Those sorts of big milestones in life are normally hero's journeys for us. They're not all the complete journey. But I think if you're somebody who's wanting to seek and grow in consciousness and in awareness, and just to grow as an individual, as a human being, to understand more, then you're probably going to take several mini hero's journeys within bigger hero's journeys within a huge one of your life. But we will have our own. I love this quote as well from Joseph Campbell, who says, if you go to the edge of the forest and you walk the path, that's not your path. That's somebody else's path. You make your path with each step you take. So each of us has a completely unique path, a unique journey, a unique life, and it's up to us what we make with it. We're like the director, we're like the film director of our life, and the writer and the actor, and we get to change the ending if we want. So if that film started out desperate and difficult and challenging, and the middle of the film is deep depression, you actually have the ability as the director, the writer and the actor of your life to make changes that make the happy ending, if that's what you would love, if that's what you choose.
Yeah, I think that it steps towards this idea of, and we've spoken about consciousness and awareness, and I often hear people say, just be in the present moment, and for some people, it just sounds like some cliche that's, okay, sure, but where else am I supposed to be? But that people can spend a lot of time in the past and the future in their heads and not be in the present moment. And if you can learn to quieten the noise of your anticipation of the future and whatever happened in the past, sort of going over the stories and so on again and again, if you're in that present moment and sort of realize what you're saying now, that you actually have this incredible responsibility of moment by moment action as life moves forward. Every step in the forest, to use the Joseph Campbell analogy, every single step that you take is your step. And even when you think that, well, I'm sort of running on autopilot, that's also a choice. And if you can take, by learning through a process, I suppose, of discipline, and it's something that, you practice it. It's like anything else. The muscle gets stronger the more you practice it.
Absolutely.
But if you learn to sort of will your will, to actually control your willpower properly moment to moment, then it becomes easier and easier to pick the things that you want to do because you have some purpose that you are heading towards. And then and so you actually become more and more consciously involved in the life that you're creating for yourself.
Totally. I love, if you think about that pathway, Joseph Campbell's pathway, you can just go on autopilot through the forest and not see any of it and end up lost in the middle of it thinking, how did I get here? Or you can make a conscious decision to look at what's around you in the forest, to enjoy the forest, to take this path rather than that one, to find that glade in the middle of the forest. There's everything. It's a good metaphor for life. I just want to touch on the present moment. I love this. I think I saw it once in a British sitcom that said, the trouble with living in the present moment is it buggers up the next moment, which I kind of liked. Because it's actually impossible to completely live in the present moment. I think we do need to live in the present moment. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And certainly if you're meditating, or if you're sitting watching a sunset, or you're with the love of your life, or your baby's just been born, or any of these absolutely beautiful, awesome moments of life.
You want to be fully there to experience that present moment.
You want to be fully there to experience them. If you want to go on a spiritual journey, I think meditation is the single most powerful tool for that, and that requires you being still and fully present. I was going to loop back to something else that I'd forgotten about meditation. When you're in a meditative state and you're in this moment, you can see that the ups and downs are just a wave, and it will pass. This too will pass. If you're in a deep depression, actually it can pass if you just allow it. If you just watch it and observe it, you can go into joy, but don't grasp the joy. It will go. But
this too shall pass.
Yeah, this too shall pass. Both ways. But I want to come back to present moment. So yes, it's very important to be able to be fully present, to be able to listen carefully, to be able to be with what's happening now. And if you're living in the past, it normally is depression. Depression is very past oriented. It's almost always living in the past and everything that happened. And anxiety is pretty much always living in the future. What's going to happen if?
Yes.
I'm going to go to Woodstock and I won't find a parking space, something like that. Or I can't go to Woodstock. Last time I went there, it was awful. So if you're living in the past or living in the future are not good ideas. Having said that, what I love is to understand that from this present moment now, we can heal things in the past and we can also create our future. So, for example, if we take therapy and the splinter that was there, the wound, from this present moment now, in hypnosis, I can take you back to a moment back then. And in the present moment that was back then, you can go back and heal the child and then bring him back to this moment now. But it all happens in this moment now because you're revivifying the past. You're not going back to tell a story and remember the past. You're actually going back to that moment in the past to heal it. So that can be very useful to look back to the past and see it from a different perspective, a bigger perspective, because the more aware we become, the more conscious we become. It's like being on a higher level of a block of flats. You can see a lot more from the top. And then you can look back and go, oh yeah, I couldn't see that before because I was in the basement. If you're going into the future from this present moment now, we can tap into the miracle day. We can tap into, what do I want to create? What do I want my day to look like today? What do I want my month to be like? What do I want from my holiday? And then that's just tapping into the future, but in a positive way from the now. And then you come back to the now to allow that future to unfold.
I like the way you unpack that. And I think, it's always important to contextualize, because you can say something in absolute terms and it sounds perfect if you put it in certain fences, and then you have to say, well, but what about if things are from a slightly different angle, you realize that was too absolutist, and the exact opposite is also true in some other way. And I think, the narrative structures in our heads that we use, the story, so to speak, is some of the stories that are like true things that happened that we recollect. We don't recollect them perfectly, but at least, they are true things from our chronicled past. And then, as you're saying, these bandages of stories and things, and, there's all of that kind of story. And then you have the anxiety about the future and the stories about how all the things are just going to keep going wrong the way they always have. Like, combine the two. But those stories are also incredibly powerful. You're saying you can use them to build something, to at least point it in a direction, to point your mind in a direction, to start building something for the future. And you can use it to go back, to go heal. You can also use it to remember a recipe that your grandmother taught you. It's powerful, it's great. So it's this wonderful tool, but there's the old saying that it makes for a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And I think that's sort of the point, is to, in terms of being in the present moment, I think you explained it nicely, that to really be fully present and then allow yourself to look into the future whilst being fully present, not just sort of the equivalent of doom scrolling potential futures, or going through your history and just agonizing over all the terrible things that you in this moment remember that you might not remember at other times, but to instead be very, very intentional about the way that you use story, in the way that you use your mind, so that it doesn't accidentally become the master and then take you on these terrible rides that might not really be in your best interest.
I think we're sometimes all susceptible to those terrible rides that are not in our best interest. But the way that I like to look at it is that we have a small self and a greater self. And the small self is the little us that's here, that's maybe has got depression or anxiety, or doesn't feel good enough or powerful enough or worthy enough, or has to get it right, or all of these kind of limiting things that get programmed into us, literally get programmed into us by our existence here, from
by
society,
your parents, by your family, society, school,
parents, the time you
and
grew
yourself,
up, the country you grew up
the
in,
magazines
the culture,
you read,
all
the
of those
TV
things.
shows you watched.
Exactly. All of these things kind of program us and condition us, and we need that part, and that's the part that people call the ego. We need that part actually to be here and live this life,
because we have a society and we have to interact with other people, and you have to somehow have an idea of how do we do this without us.
But that's exactly what the ego does. It goes, how does the world work? How does the world around me work, and how do I fit in with that, and how do I make sure that I can do everything? Oh, yes, I need to do this and this and this, and then I'll be okay. And
then I'll be loved.
And then I'll be loved, because the wounding is love. So that's the kind of the ego and the small self. But we also have a greatness. And the greatness, without wanting to get too woo-woo, is more to do with a higher self, our greatness, our spirit, our soul. Is more to do with creativity and music and intuition, and the joyous things of life come from somewhere else. And you'll often hear authors talk about how they have the muse. And when the muse is there, they can write, and when it's not, they can't write. And that's because the muse is part of themselves in another dimension, maybe not in a physical body. You hear now, we're being told both by quantum physics and by spiritual traditions, that there is no separation, we're all one. But we feel very separate. I feel like I'm a separate person. I'm sitting over here from this side of the table.
But the ego is separated.
But the ego is
per
separated.
definition.
That's right. So the ego is your sort of vehicle of orientation. It's the thing that comes down here that makes you feel separate, so that you live your life and do what you came here to do, maybe fulfill your potential or grow in the way your soul wants you to grow. But you still got the soul and the spirit and the higher, greater self. And what happens in most people's life is that the ego becomes the master and the greatness becomes the slave, and it needs to be the other way round. So we really need to live from our greatness coming through the small self. So if we think about, say, an artist, the artist is inspired by something. Where does inspiration come from? It comes from out there. It's not something you can put in a wheelbarrow. It's not something you can box.
Yeah.
It's this nebulous thing: inspiration, imagination, intuition, creativity, innovation. They come from out there somewhere. So maybe the artist is sitting with some innovative ideas, is inspired by something, and has an imagination for what she wants to paint, or he wants to paint on the canvas. But the small self is the one who has to pick up the brush and put it in the paints and daub the markings on the page. The small self is the one that maybe had to go through art college to learn, or some kind of training to learn technique. So they have to be working in harmony. But always it's the greater self that should be leading things, because that's the expansive self that is connected to everything, that can see everything from a higher vantage point. And when you can get the small self in alignment, working in harmony and balance with the greater self, that's when you get your greatest creations. Whether you're creating a painting or writing a book or doing a podcast or creating a holiday or anything else in your life, partner, creating joy instead of depression. I like the idea of creating things rather than fixing things. So if you're sitting there with depression, sometimes it can feel impossible to try and fix that depression. But what about if you created happiness?
You're saying that in some instances it makes sense to go back as you're saying, maybe in hypnotherapy or something, to go back in the past and remove a specific injury so that that can heal and so that you can be okay. But sometimes there's so many bandages, and you've created such a mess of bandages in your story that it's going to take so long to just, we can spend the rest of your life just taking off bandages, or we can just build forward.
I think you have to do both. There's a place for both. Sometimes it's difficult to build forward and create what you would absolutely love if you are steeped in depression and you have trauma. But choosing to create joy might mean that you're led to go back and unhook things that are stopping joy. They're blocks that you might have to go back and loosen.
Yeah.
So I think it's...
And so not kind of sit back and say, let me go to a healer, a therapist, a retreat, or whatever. I have lots of problems, and they're going to fix it for me. And then sit there and hope that they untangle all of the mess that you've created in your life. And then you'll be okay, you'll be clear. And now that you are clear, you'll be able to build forward. What you're saying is you need to choose that you're going to build forward. And once you've decided, then that becomes a pulling force that's going to start exerting pressure on whatever kind of negative story is impeding your ability to build the way that you want to.
Absolutely. And also, I really like the idea of somebody going to a therapist and going, right, the therapist is going to fix me. The therapist can't do it. I love this old joke. How many psychotherapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. It's just an old joke. But what I know from experience working with people, if somebody comes into, when I was a therapist, I don't really do that work anymore. This is back in London. When somebody came in and they were highly motivated and they'd made that decision, they want to be free of whatever it is that they've come in for. And they've done their miracle day and they've chosen it and they really want to get to there. They're going to work hard in those sessions. They're going to want to uncover things. They're going to want to take the bandages off. They're not going to shy away from the pain, which is a short, sharp pain, by the way. They're not in pain for a long time. Like taking the splinter out. It's a short, sharp pain. Those people, those who are motivated, they're making the choice and they're taking responsibility for their own well-being. And that's what we all have to do, is to take responsibility for what we create, for who we are, for what we've done, for what we want to do, for how we want to heal. It's not the therapist's responsibility. When you get a client in who thinks the therapist is going to fix me, you don't get anywhere because they haven't taken responsibility. They haven't chosen. So it doesn't matter what the therapist does. They're not going to make the same changes and shifts. They might to some degree, but not in the same way.
Essentially need the therapist to try and inspire them to make the decision to take responsibility for their own actions, and then...
Yes, you'd hope that they'd already decided that before they reach out to the therapist, that they take responsibility for how they're feeling and they want to do something about it. And as I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be therapy. It depends on the severity of the depression. Sometimes people just get depressed because they're on some medication. That's the side effect. So maybe come off the medication or find a different one, or because their microbiome is out of whack, or because... Oh, and there's also, I want to just touch on, I remember somebody coming to me years ago because their best friend had died and they were depressed. And I said, I'm not going to work with you. It's normal. If your best friend has just died, you should be in bereavement.
If you are feeling elated because your best friend just died, then maybe you should come see me.
So I said, listen, no, this is normal life. This is part of normal life. We're going to go through times of sadness and depression. It's how the psyche handles and processes things.
And that's what you're saying, the difference between pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And so that's a normative pain.
That's right.
It's when it's 20 years on and you refuse to have any friends because you had a friend who died 20 years ago. Now you're creating unnecessary bandages.
That's right. Absolutely. That's a really good example. And that particular person, I said to her, this is all normal. So I just gave her let her talk, basically, because talking about your problems does tend to reduce them. And then I said to her, look...
Up to some point, right?
To some point. So for her, definitely, I gave her just a session of allowing herself to talk about her feelings and what was going on with her best friend having passed away, and then said, look, this is normal. But if in 6 months' time you're still feeling exactly the same as this, then maybe come back. But I would say a year. It takes a year to get over somebody. Well, no, you never get over somebody very close passing away, but it takes a year to get past all the anniversaries that trigger you into depression, and then to start to breathe again and say, okay, I can have my life again. So it depends on what it is. And some people get depressed about quite strange things. They get depressed because they didn't get 96% in their exam or something like that, or they get depressed because they failed their driving. Those sorts of things we can become aware of. We don't have to go back into the past necessarily. It's just becoming aware and saying, well, it's a choice.
Yeah, it's fine. Again, I think the difference between pain and suffering, right? So you can decide to create suffering from that, or just, oh, this was embarrassing. I really thought I was going to nail that test, and I failed. That's embarrassing. I feel kind of stupid and angry at myself and frustrated that I didn't anticipate it the right way. And these feelings are fine.
Yeah, and expressing them is fine.
And expressing them is fine. Holding on to them, however, and allowing them, dragging them along with you, well, that just seems silly.
And it probably means you're going to fail the next one because you're still hanging on to it. Whereas if you've acknowledged it already, as you suggested, then you can go, okay, well, it is what it is. Screwed up this time, or for whatever reason, I feel like a fool. I'm embarrassed about it. But I'm going to just get some more practice in before the next one.
Yeah, instead of beating yourself up about it for too long.
Yeah.
And I think maybe this is also, and I want to sort of start to wrap this up, but I find a sense of humor. And there's this a quote that I really love, and I think I've been overusing it recently, but I just love it so much. And it's just, life is tough. It is what it is. You can approach it with a slight sense of amusement or a slight sense of annoyance.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think and I always butcher quotes, so that's not exactly what it's supposed to be, but it is this idea of allow yourself to be angry that you failed the driving license test, for instance. Have that moment of frustration and annoyance, but also laugh at yourself while you're doing it. And it's a muscle that you practice. The more you learn to actually just laugh at these things and go, you can't do anything about it now. It's already done. You might as well laugh about it. You might as well tease yourself a little bit and poke fun at it, just to sort of, I think, again, allow that general mood to be a little bit more positive, which is going to mean that in your thinking, you're going to be thinking about slightly more positive things that you can remember instead of the really negative ones. And so that reinforces, and you can positively reinforce a more positive direction for yourself going forward.
Comes back to that thoughts and feelings, doesn't it? What thoughts and feelings are you choosing? Yes, you've got to express them in the moment, but you can shift them. I think I love that little quote that you gave. And I think maybe the beginning of that, if you can't quite manage approaching it with a little humour, is to maybe you can approach it with being open and curious. So, I failed. At least, yes. I failed the thing. Oh, I'm curious. What did I do? Well, I think I did this and I did that. Okay. Don't beat yourself up too long.
A little bit of an exploration. Yeah. Bridget, this has been so much fun. Where can people find you? Website, X handle, anything like that?
Best place to go is my website, www.bridgetfinklaire.com. I'm sure you have the spelling for people.
Yes, I'll definitely drop that in the notes.
It's an F for Freddie and a K. And on the website, you can sign up for my newsletter. Please do that, because there'll be lots of things coming up with the launch of the new book. There'll be some freebies coming up. There might be some free trainings and keeping people informed of what's going on. So please sign up for the newsletter. And also on there's links to my social media. X, I do have X, but I'm not very active on X. So rather, there's a Facebook authors page, there's a Instagram, and there's YouTube, which are the main ones. But they're all links on my website, so I think that's the best place to find me. And there's also links if you want to buy Red Dress.
Uh-huh.
So please visit the website.
And you were saying that you are close to the process with Bone Ring?
The Bone Circle.
Bone Circle.
Yeah, almost.
Bone Circle, almost there. When can people expect that?
I don't know is the real answer. I
At least you're honest about it.
I finished the first draft and I've started editing, and editing takes longer than you think. And then with the publishing world is incredibly slow. I think the last Red Dress took 9 months to get published from the manuscript. But I want to up my game, and I know that with the bigger publishers, it can take 6 months just from you submitting the manuscript to them coming back to you and saying, yes, okay, we're going to publish it, and then another. So it conceivably could be towards the end of this year, even into next year, before that book becomes available. But there's a lot of other things going on before that, because I also want to record some of the early modules. It's in 5 modules. It's a training in 5 modules. And I need to record some of those online. So those may become available before the book. There's going to be some introductions for that, which will be free. So there will be other activity going along. But look out for The Bone Circle. It's a life-changing book.
Sounds very exciting, and I look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bridget Finklaire, thank you very much.
Thank you, Danie. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.